Hello and welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today, mostly because we're putting on our managerial accounting hats for a true masterclass on a completely fascinating and highly testable topic in the CMA Part 1 syllabus, joint and byproduct costing. Listen, if you've ever felt completely lost trying to figure out how to assign costs when a single process literally spits out multiple different items, you are in exactly the right place. Imagine for a second that you run a business where you pour a massive batch of raw ingredients into a machine, and suddenly 3 completely different products come out of the chute at the exact same time. How on earth do you decide how much of the original raw ingredient cost belongs to each individual item? It's like a giant puzzle, and it's the exact problem we're going to solve together today.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for the day. We'll start with the split-off point, then move to the main allocation methods, look at handling byproducts, tackle the sell or process further decision, and finish up with your exam checklist. Let's get to it. Section 1. The split-off point. This is where our products actually separate. To really ground this concept, I want you to picture a massive dairy farm. You bring in all this raw milk, process it in one giant vat, and at one very specific moment, that single input separates. Out comes heavy cream, skim milk, and buttermilk. In the accounting world, that initial phase creates what we call joint costs. And that exact moment of physical separation, that's your split-off point. Now, the core CMA dilemma here is that any money you spent on the farm before that split-off simply cannot be traced directly to just the cream or just the buttermilk. The costs are completely tangled together. Because they're unallocatable by direct tracing, we're forced to use a logical, systematic method to allocate those joint costs fairly to the different products. Moving right along to Section 2, the main allocation methods. Essentially, how do we divide up the bill? So when we have multiple primary products coming out of a joint process, the exam fully expects you to know how to allocate those costs. There are 3 primary methods. The first is the physical measure method. As the name implies, this is mechanically the simplest way to do it. You allocate the joint costs based entirely on a physical characteristic right at the split-off point. Things like pounds, gallons, or tons. So if cream makes up 10% of the total gallons produced, it gets 10% of the joint costs. Seems incredibly easy, right? Well, I've got to warn you about a massive catch here. This method completely ignores economic value. To show you how absurd this can get, imagine a mining process that yields both lead and gold. If you allocate costs purely on weight, a pound of cheap lead and a pound of incredibly valuable gold would be assigned the exact same cost allocation. From a business perspective, that makes absolutely zero economic sense. Now, the solution to that physical measure problem, and frankly, the CMA exam's absolute favorite approach, is the sales value at split-off method. This method is beloved because it perfectly follows the benefits received principle of accounting. Instead of looking at weight or volume, we look at what the products could actually sell for on the open market exactly at the split-off point, and we allocate the cost proportionally. Notice the breakdown here. If product X represents 60% of the total market value of everything produced at the split-off point, then it rightfully absorbs 60% of the joint costs. It's logical, it's totally fair, and it accurately ties your cost to the actual economic benefit the product brings into the company. But let's add a quick layer of complexity here. What happens if a product just isn't sellable right at the split-off point? Sometimes a product comes out of the joint process, but it needs more work before a customer will actually buy it. It requires further processing. In this scenario, we obviously can't use the sales value at split-off because, well, there is no sales value yet. Instead, we use the net realizable value, or NRV method. Here's your simple step-by-step breakdown. Step 1, you find the final expected sales value of the completed product. Step 2, you subtract any separable costs required to process it further after the split-off point. Step 3, that leaves you with your net realizable value. Once you have the NRV for all your products, you just allocate the initial joint costs based on each product's proportional share of that total NRV pool.
Section 3. Handling byproducts, those little incidental outputs.
Let's switch gears and think of a lumber mill. You're cutting timber, that's your main product, but you inevitably create a huge pile of sawdust. That sawdust is a byproduct with very minor sales value. Because its value is so small, we don't even bother with complex joint cost allocations for it. Instead, the exam just wants to know how you handle the tiny amount of revenue it does bring in. There are 2 perfectly acceptable treatments for this. On the left, we have the production method, which is also known as the offset cost approach. Under this method, we recognize the byproduct's expected value the very moment it's created. We then take that expected value and use it to actually reduce the inventory cost of our main products. On the right, we have the sales method, which treats the byproduct as other income.
Here, you just completely ignore the byproduct when it's created. You don't record a single thing until it's actually sold to a customer. When the cash finally comes in, you simply record it on the income statement as other revenue or maybe as a minor reduction to your cost of goods sold.
Section 4. Sell or process further. Now, I need you on high alert here because this is a massive decision trap. You will absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, see a question on your exam that looks exactly like this. It's going to ask, should we sell product X immediately at the split-off point, or should we spend an extra $5,000 to process it further into a premium product? Let's call it Product X Plus. The problem will intentionally feed you a massive list of past joint costs, overhead allocations, and completely useless historical data just to confuse you. It's a classic trick. So how do you make the right mathematical decision? This perfectly illustrates the elegance of managerial accounting. To solve this, you only need to compare two specific numbers, and you ignore everything else. First, look at the incremental revenue. How much more money will you get by selling the Premium X Plus instead of the basic product X? Second, look at the incremental cost. How much extra does it cost to process it further? In our little example, that's the $5,000. The rule is breathtakingly simple. If the incremental revenue is greater than the incremental cost, process it further. If it's less, sell it at split off. So the absolutely crucial point is this: joint costs are sunk costs. When you're making that sell or process further decision, it does not matter one bit how much money you spent before the split-off point. It doesn't matter how you allocated those joint costs. That money is gone. Poof. It is completely 100% irrelevant to your decision of what to do next. Do not let the exam trick you into factoring those initial joint costs into your forward-looking decision.
And finally, Section 5, your exam checklist. Let's lock in those points.
Huge congratulations on surviving the boss fight of this topic. Honestly, if you grasped that sunk cost rule, you are already way ahead of the curve. Here is your ultimate takeaway checklist. You might want to take a mental snapshot of this. First, joint costs. Remember, these happen before the split-off point. To allocate them fairly, you're going to use the sales value at split-off method whenever possible, or the NRV method if further processing is required. Second, byproducts. These are incidental, minimal value items. Do not allocate joint costs to them. Just use either the production method to offset your main costs or the sales method to record miscellaneous income. And finally, the big one, sell or process further. Ignore those joint costs completely because they are sunk. Only compare the incremental revenue you'd gain to the incremental costs you'd incur.
Master these distinctions, keep your eye firmly fixed on that split-off point, and you will navigate this topic on exam day with total confidence. Now, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder. Does the concept of completely ignoring joint costs for the sell or process further decision fully make sense to you conceptually? Or would you like to walk through a quick practice calculation next time to see it in action with real numbers? Let that sink in. Keep up the incredible work, stay focused on those concepts, and I will see you in our next explainer.